police convoy, which had speeded through the streets with lights flashing, seemed to be the spark for fresh violence after a morning of uneasy calm. Rubble-strewn streets like this are nothing new to Mr. Hurd after his experiences in Northern Ireland. But he had barely arrived when there were the first signs of trouble as youths jeered and booed. Mr. Hurd continued, surrounded by police, and attempted to talk to some of the residents. But behind, a crowd had gathered and started throwing stones and bottles.
Get through.
Instantly, the police moved in and hustled him away into a side street, where he was unceremoniously bundled into a police van and driven away. He'd been on the scene only 5 minutes. By now, the situation was out of hand. The police van lay on its side, burning. The police backed off to put on their riot gear. Anxious residents were hustled into their homes away from trouble, while out in the streets, more cars were burning. An ITN camera car was one of the targets. 12 hours after the overnight rioting had died down, police were once again holding the line on the streets of Handsworth.
Police lost control of a half-mile stretch of Handsworth when a mob of 400 turned it into an inferno during an orgy of destruction. The police were powerless to stop it. The scenes were like something out of the Blitz. Police admit they were taken by surprise, their intelligence network failing to detect anything more than the usual tensions in this mixed-race area. It was declared a full-scale riot, but police and firemen on the ground said it was more than a riot, it was a battle. Lives they feared would almost certainly be lost. At the start of it, firemen trying to put out a blaze in a bingo hall were inexplicably attacked with a hail of missiles and petrol bombs. There is little doubt that police were slowing clearing the trouble spots. Some streets were turned into no-go areas. Rioting turned into looting and then arson on an enormous scale. At least 50 buildings were gutted. It's just after midnight, more than 4 hours after the trouble started. This is the devastation that police found once it was safe to move in here. Firemen are now trying to put the blazes out, blazes that have destroyed shops, food stores and even the post office, now virtually unrecognisable in the rubble. Firefighters made what police said was a supreme effort, but they couldn't prevent the destruction running into millions.
I've never seen anything like it before in my life, never.
Out on the street since 7:30 tonight, and all they've done is looted and burned.
Dozens of premises were smashed open, their contents looted. Shopkeepers watched helplessly as their livelihoods went up in smoke. The Asian community bore the brunt of the violence. Most shops destroyed were Asian-owned. Police say West Indians did it.
What do you expect from us? What do you expect us to say?
Why has this happened?
You tell me.
Tell us. If we knew
You
why
tell
it
us.
happened.
All we know is that we try to make a living by working all hours of the day, and this is what we get from the British police protection.
Some talked of revenge. The police tried to defuse it, but many Asians were in no doubt about why they'd been singled out.
Not just their tension, it's just that they know we got the money. That's why they're going after our shops.
During brief moments of rest for the police and firemen, the Salvation Army were supportive in a role which they said resembled the aftermath of a wartime air raid. The Chief Constable toured the front line praising his men and fire crews for handling disturbances far worse than those experienced here 4 years ago. Uppermost in his mind were facts that might explain why so many Asian businesses were attacked.
Shopkeepers that we want you to cooperate entirely along here and think and get them to think, because we want to catch the people that did this.
I think it's quite disastrous. I saw the aftermath of Brixton and I think this is worse. And the tragedy is that it's come after so many years of very good community relations here with absolutely nothing to indicate that this would happen. It is pure naked hooliganism running on into outright violence and theft and nothing else. It's totally against the run of all the indicators so far. We don't believe there are any injuries or, God forbid, people dead in there, but the fire brigade is beginning to search that. There's a massive operation, and you've seen a whole area devastated here tonight.
But people were trapped inside at least one building. The police say they didn't know this at the time.
2 days after having one of the best carnivals that we've ever had in the city, and it would appear through insensitive policing again, we are now struck with this silly problem, which looks so serious that people are actually trapped in there.
By morning, the full extent of damage could be seen as the smoke cleared over the neighbourhood. Damping down operations were still a priority, and many hours after the flames died out, the ruins still smouldered. It wasn't until firemen began searching the burnt-out shells that the horror of charred corpses were discovered in the post office. Before anyone had been identified, a number of Asians were grieving openly in the streets. They believed they had lost some of their family, who'd probably been burnt alive. As the first body was recovered from the building, the question being asked is why a showpiece of community policing in a difficult ethnic area had gone so disastrously wrong. This evening, riot squads are remaining in position. Several arrests have already been made, and there's a slow build-up of youths hanging around the streets. The police have noticeably tried to keep a low profile, but in an atmosphere charged with suspicion and fear, in an area where people have tasted lawlessness, there's a real danger that it could be repeated. Brent Sadler, ITN, Handsworth.
Brixton burned, there were also riots in Handsworth, but on a much smaller scale. And many people believe it was because of the good relations between the community and the police.
What are the causes of it then?
The cause?
What are the grievances?
The number one cause of it is you've got some well, we call them Starsky officers who goes around in their little car and they screech down and you make a hell of a lot of noise. Just stopping one person, you know. And once they stop that one person, they're good. They stop a white person, it's just that officer and that person. They stop an Indian person, they stop a Greek person, right? And that's it. That's one officer and that person. Now, when they stop a black guy on the road or a black cat, the whole station is down.
These blacks say that things have worsened since the appointment of a new superintendent 4 months ago.
Before we started to understand the problem, it was changing things right, left and centre. Now how can you start changing things when you don't understand what is happening? We thought when he came, he would have at least taken a year to understand the problem.
Moving with the people.
Talk by going around, seeing the people, talking to the people that matters, understanding the problem, and then try to make it. But it is a Thatcherism.
No, they've talked about
he is what I would call a racist.
When David Webb was around here, you saying that things were better.
That was a gentleman. But he understood he tried to understand what happened, right? He was here so long, right?
Become one of us.
That he understood the problem in the end and tried to help.
But the police in Handsworth, as indeed anywhere else, have a dilemma, whether to be tougher or softer. That dilemma was illustrated today when Labour Party Deputy Leader Roy Hattersley visited Handsworth. On the one hand, he heard the complaints of harassment.
Labour Party's got nothing to say about police harassment.
Anybody who tries to put this down to anything other than criminality is doing no service at all to the cause of good race relations in this city.
Last night, it's got nothing to say about that.
What I've got to say is that 2 members of the minority communities were killed in there last night, and anybody who tries to justify that is wholly and totally disgraceful.
And complaints from those who don't think the police have been tough enough, especially last night.
Mr. Seguin there in that outdoor, he phoned the police 5 times and they never came out to him.
That's exactly the sort of stuff that you've got to say at the public inquiry.
Many of the Asians we spoke to today were too frightened to be interviewed on camera, through fear of retaliation. Most of the shops last night which were burned were Asian, though most people here stress that normally relations between Asians and blacks are good. But over the months, many in this community, Asians, whites and blacks, far from complaining of harassment, say the police haven't been tough enough against the major problem, drug pushers. The former...
In St Paul's in Bristol, it ended in a pitched battle between mainly black youths and police. A year later, trouble followed in Brixton. It raged for 3 days and nights, injuring more than 500 police and civilians. That summer in Toxteth in Liverpool, rioting flared again. 40 properties were gutted and tear gas was used for the first time in mainland Britain. Disturbances followed in Manchester's Moss Side and in other inner city areas, including Handsworth. In the wake of Toxteth, the then Environment Secretary, Michael Heseltine, set up a Merseyside task force to tackle housing problems and create jobs. And the Brixton riots were investigated by Lord Scott.
6 firemen were injured and an unknown number of civilians. More than 50 shops and offices were destroyed and at least 20 cars set on fire.
Sunset, and Handsworth looks deceptively peaceful. But smoke still marks the spot where violence and death tore up.
The rioters set Handsworth ablaze last night, burning shops, warehouses, the homes of their own community. A few days ago, the people here celebrated their local carnival in traditional, peaceful style. Last night, some 400 mainly black youths roamed the streets. They attacked police and firemen, throwing stones, bricks and petrol bombs. The trouble erupted at about 8 o'clock. The fire brigade were called to a blaze at a former bingo hall. Youths who'd gathered there said they should let it burn. When they refused, the petrol bombs started to fly.
It was under attack early on.
When the rioting began, 12 police officers were out on the beat. Some local people say it took far too long for the police to get onto the streets in any significant numbers. Reinforcements were brought in from neighbouring forces, and by midnight more than 600 officers were trying to contain the violence. Rioters overturned cars and set them alight to make barricades. Police with riot gear sealed off the streets. At least 20 police and firemen were injured. More than 50 shops were wrecked and looted.
Everything is destroyed.
The violence also destroyed a church, a garage and a pub. This morning, in the burnt-out wreckage of a post office in Lozells Road, firemen found 2 bodies.
Welling up within them, you know what I mean? And they're going to have to find something to let it out with, you know what I mean? And as you can see now, the rioting is part of it. You know what I mean? They've got it boiled up so much inside them of so much harassment that they're taking. They can't take it anymore, so they just riot.
The cost of the damage caused by the Handsworth riots is already expected to run into several £million. But soon after the clearing up got underway, violence flared again.
Just a week in the Home Office and the worst possible start for Douglas Hurd. He arrived in Birmingham, a broken foot in plaster, first to be briefed by police and then straight on to Handsworth. But far from calming the situation, his presence triggered off first abuse and then a riot. Just minutes before, Mr. Hurd had been led round the corner to a safer area, anxious to talk to residents who'd endured what some were calling a night of sheer hell.
Just watch out for the stones, man. They're coming this way.
Keep moving, please. Yeah. Keep moving, please.
But as the mob and stones caught up with him, Mr. Hurd found himself on the run. So had it been a wise decision to come?
Today, at this particular point.
Essential.
Why?
Your reaction to being stoned? I'm not conscious of having been stoned. Nothing has hit me. I'm not denying it. Don't forget, I've been Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
But as the crowds hemmed in and the Home Secretary was pushed and jostled, fears about his personal safety began to rise. His car lost in the crowd, a fortified transit van was summoned. Mr. Hurd was hustled inside and taken out of the area. Well, it's now 2:45 and Mr. Hurd has been safely shepherded away. But this is what's been left behind him. Utter chaos and devastation. Many people in this area simply don't know which way to turn for safety. Did you ever believe? Small groups of youths, most of them black, continued to roam the streets. Vehicles were set alight. Police with riot shields were continually on the move, and many innocent civilians were caught in the midst of the violence.
Well, I've turned my van upside down for a start off. They've took my necklace off, and I had some money on me. They've took all that out. They took my coat as well. The glasses in the van. They've turned the van upside down.
Did they smack you in the head as well?
They'll throw 3 or 4 bricks at me, haven't they?
As firemen and police coped best they could with the chaos, some of their injured colleagues were making for the refuge of the local police station. Mr. Hurd arrived to commend them on their bravery. While there, another youth was brought in for questioning. Mr. Hurd was clearly shocked by all he'd seen. But what had he learnt?
I learned that what happened last night was overwhelmingly a matter of crime.
Prepared to head back to London to report to the Prime Minister, the people of Handsworth were counting the cost of yet another few hours of mayhem.
Police used tear gas for the first time on the British mainland. In Brixton in South London, more petrol bombs and buildings gutted. It followed an intense police street operation called Swamp 81. After Brixton, Lord Scarman was asked to lead a government.
Unlike the previous night, the police presence on the streets of Birmingham was both heavy and widespread. Though the scale of the violence was nothing like that of 24 hours before, gangs were still roaming the streets, smashing shop fronts, setting fire to cars, and keeping the emergency services fully stretched. Snatch squads moved in to make numerous arrests as police fears of copycat violence in other parts of the city were confirmed. A stop was put to the looting of this furniture shop in Walsall Heath almost as soon as it began. In all, there were around 150 separate incidents. The Chief Constable offered words of encouragement to his men. Did he think the worst of the violence was not? It was. West Midlands Fire Brigade have today released pictures they'd taken at the height of Monday's riot. They'll use this for future training, but it underlines the impossibility of the job that the emergency services were faced with. The cost in monetary and human terms of all this is staggering. Now it's going to take more than just ideas and good intentions to restore confidence in this sorry part of Birmingham, where they'll have to live with the scars for months to come. But how?
Trying to say, right, they cannot take the harassment no more, can't take it no more. They want things. Nothing's given to us, right? Anything we get, we have to take, and that's why you see people sell ganja, marijuana, because the little £52 where that man's getting every 2 weeks, and he has to feed his family after that. Same way, right? He can't do nothing about that.
Right, I think it's all racist, and they don't seem to understand black people's problems for a start, because they don't come and sit down and talk to us. When they say they do have meetings here and there, they don't really get to the heart of the problem in the ghetto.
But they were matched by the number of police patrolling the area. Their main concern was to prevent them building into large groups. Most of the people were what the police described as spectators, but there were widespread cases of vandalism by small roving gangs.
Check the alley.
A number of innocent bystanders were hurt in the clashes. Cars and vans were once again the favourite targets for the arsonists. The crews who had to tackle the fires again came under attack with a hail of bricks and bottles. Chemists were singled out by the gangs searching for drugs, leaving a trail of destruction behind them. This morning, scuffles broke out at Birmingham's Magistrates Court, where nearly 70 people arrested during the riots were appearing. Several people, including policemen, were knocked to the ground as blows were exchanged.
Just simply harassing them unnecessarily.
We're not hiding as black people, right, that we have our dealings in, you know, herbs. But as to cocaine and heroin and speed and all this shit, We don't deal in that.
That's what the class do. That's how
but you see, it's like they want to class the
herbs,
marijuana, cocaine, and say if you smoke marijuana, it's going to lead you on to this and lead you on to that. And that's a load of bullshit.
Last Thursday, local...
We want to put it as if it's something separate, but it's something which is related to what's happening in South Africa. Every day we wake up, we read the news, we're hearing about 20 more dead, 15 more dead, 30 more dead. I mean, what are we supposed to do? And all that the South Africans are doing, our black brothers and sisters, they're just fighting for better living condition, man. Better living condition, and that is what they get killed. So, if we want better living conditions, we got to do the same fight. When you saw television yesterday, right, Handsworth was on television for 4 hours, right? In my experience, I've never seen Handsworth on television for more than 3 minutes, much less 4 hours. So, if it takes a riot for people to notice what's happening in Handsworth, well, it's just riot then, isn't it?
Police were called in this morning. 81. The toll of injuries and property damage led to the much publicised measures initiated by the then Environment Secretary Michael Heseltine. Subsequently, Liverpool's present Labour Council tried to tackle the city's racial problems by
tranquility. At the Thornhill Road police station, Rastafarian Nigel Heath, the man who's a red...
Firemen were attacked with petrol bombs and bricks as they tried to put out a fire at a disused bingo hall. Soon, barricades of cars were erected in the streets and set alight.
The police crackdown on drugs trafficking in Handsworth began several weeks ago. A police video camera recorded one raid on the Villa Cross pub. Drug squad officers had spent weeks on surveillance before their units moved in force. It was a high-profile operation, although it's believed it netted only a small amount of soft drugs. But the community saw it as a sudden dramatic change in police tactics. Now senior detectives believe the subsequent riots were started in a bid to protect the drugs trade.
Drugs, no.
Detectives said a picture of a man with a petrol bomb that appeared nationwide could have been Hazel. But his father, who last week promised to turn his...
In light of last night's riot, parts of Brixton were ablaze. Petrol bombers vented their anger at the police shooting of Cherry Groce. "12 hours later, the rubble was still smouldering, and so was the mood in Brixton. It seemed nothing could dampen the anger at police. 4 years after the 1981 riots, parts of Brixton lay in ruins.
The tactic was to advance steadily and contain the fighting. But, like a bushfire, it sprouted up over a large area, an area observers had already described as a tinderbox. Tonight, the...
To me, yes, I would like your assistance to help me to see the family so that I can begin this inquiry. Is this the first time you see the family? I have tried to see the family. I want to see the family so that I can get on with this inquiry. Thank you very much.
The chief constable left empty-handed. A policeman had shot Mrs. Groce, and another policeman was getting no help in investigating the shot that sparked a riot.
Small crowds of youths carried on roaming the streets, setting vehicles alight and injuring many innocent civilians.
Well, I've turned my van upside down for a start off.
Some groups of youths gathered, but they either dispersed of their own accord or were moved on by police. Many members of the Asian community said
Brixton today woke up to the full measure of a night of rioting, looting and petrol bombing. This four-storey building was one of 4 reduced to rubble, 2 of them gutted by fire. A 94-year-old man living alone in a first-floor flat escaped after spotting youths with petrol bombs attacking the shop below him. Rioters had commandeered cars at will, setting them ablaze in the maze of streets around Brixton. There was looting by black and white on a massive scale. Police reported 137 burglaries, robberies and other major crimes. There were isolated clashes throughout today. This was one of those that brought riot squad police onto the scene again. Generally, though, police commanders had sought to strike a balance between restrained policing and a swift but measured response to trouble. A steady trickle of arrests this afternoon took the number to well over 150 since last night. As darkness fell, the helmeted riot squad began to replace uniformed officers, and there were some scattered incidents. A market barrow was set alight by youths passing through a shopping precinct, and there was a brief chase through the streets. In an uneasy calm tonight, the police tactic was clearly to keep dispersing any build-up of crowds.
The knife edge on which many of Britain's inner cities are sitting. Both government and police are now only too aware that one spark is enough to disturb a fragile peace. One tragic incident sufficient to damage years of work by those striving to build better community relations. But yesterday's shooting, all sides agree, could not excuse the burning, the looting and the sheer mayhem that followed. So, had the police response been positive enough?
Manpower was brought in extremely quickly. At no time did we withdraw.
The shooting which sparked off last night's violence.
Crowds started gathering in the square. It was this time yesterday that the trouble began, and the police were expecting the worst. While press reports talk of a number of reasons for the disturbances, people in the community are convinced there is just one major cause.
Seems to me the focus on the focal situation that we got dealing here with.
That they were in control. They'd kept the crowds moving on and away from the police station, but there were still pockets of anger to deal with. A few stones, some burnt-out cars, and 48 arrests. By Saturday standards, it was a quiet night.
Inquiry, public inquiry. We need that. Inquiry, public inquiry. Everybody living in my community. You, Miss Jarrett, as a loving lady. But no, she's a victim of society. She was treated so bad, treated brutally. No answer them questions one by we. Did you enter legal or illegally? Did you find anything on Miss Jarrett's property? Say what did you do when she collapsed suddenly? Did you dial 999 immediately?
One day later, the protest became a riot.